Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Introducing Mario Cucinella and his work means referring to important and topical themes and subjects. One element for all. In 2050, the cities of the world will collect 75% of the world population, distributed mostly in megalopolies of several millions of inhabitants, in highly urbanized areas and regions that will go beyond the current borders and sizes of urban cities today. Now, of course, in Europe as well, 50% of energy consumption is taken up by urban areas and cities. And so, faced with these figures and statistics, of course, architecture, designing new cities becomes a very important element in managing and saving natural resources. We speak of diversity, bio buildings, eco-sustainability, all different ways to provide support and make sustainability important. And so we should also speak of responsible, accountable architecture. But this is not just technological and things related to the performance of architectural structures and the high degree, for instance, of technologies that can be used, of course, which are important, but which alone cannot support all this. Technology and performance, of course, go together, and Mario Cucinella tells us that beyond this we have to have other values as well. As Richard Rogers stated, there can't be cities with sustainable environments, providing that if sociology and other sciences are not involved in urban planning as well. So the approach must be holistic when it comes to designing and urban planning. And so architecture as a project is no longer just uh, a spot or a commercial where it's self-referential, but rather it has to include and encompass a series of other aspects which require a holistic approach. So Mario Cucinella's approach, with a slogan that summed up his way of working, was the following. He said it was opposed to what is summarized in the formula aesthetics without ethics, therefore only aesthetics without ethics. Focus on reducing waste in Mario's work, in some of his projects that he will be talking about, also considers an understanding of the urban heritage and artifacts of the urban situation as something to work with and not something to replace through demolition, for instance. There's one project, for instance, which I appreciate a lot, presented in Milan for i.lab. Um, social buildings were sponsored with new architectural forms on the roofs, and they were refurbishing projects of refurbishing buildings that already existed. So architecture seen as a resource that can be improved and developed. Empathetic creativity. Mario defines sustainability in the following way. He says two things have to be taken into account. One is the technical performance aspect and the other is a care for the environment and the landscape, which generates empathy. Empathy means the ability to understand the mood of cities and the territories against a model where there is indifference towards the people and the locations. And therefore, there's a need to go there's a need to go against the simplification of languages, and languages have to be adapted to the local traditions and culture. Welcome, and I'm very pleased to be here this morning, and I'd like to thank for the introduction. It's not uh, always the case to be in such a wonderful location, and this is amazing and very pleasant for an architect that goes around the world working at various projects, and there is very little quality around the world, so I'm really pleased to be here in a space designed by a great master, a generation that is coming to an end. Modernism is towards its ending, and there's now some substitution. So first of all, creative empathy, as it was mentioned. I'm also usually very weary in providing precise definitions of these statements. It's difficult to make a statement on architecture. It's somewhat more complex than it seems. But creative empathy was another way of defining sustainability. Sustainability is a word which is now widely used. It's part of our daily language, but and there again, it's difficult to define sustainability. What is sustainability? If we were to go into the definition, we it's we would realize that we're currently living in a world which is unsustainable. But creative empathy instead stems from the experience in these past years, whereby empathy is a moment of listening. A person who is empathetic is a person who puts himself or herself in someone else's shoes and tries to understand. This is why I like the word. A person looking for an understanding of what's happening. Why is this place the way it is? What are its features? And creativity is, of course, a great instrument. It's an element because through empathy we can provide an intelligent and meaningful answer to a place, a location. And in our working process as architects, all this is important. And creativity, of course, is important because if you're not creative, you shouldn't be doing this. But creativity is like a wild horse. It has to be harnessed because if you're just creative without some form of regulation, it won't lead anywhere. Or extravagance, for instance, which is another theme which is interesting in architecture nowadays. We go from sustainability, and then you go from that area to something totally extravagant. For instance, somebody, for instance, requesting a project in the center of Rome might request, let's do something bizarre. So we're experiencing in a moment where everyone is ecologist, environmentally friendly, but on the other hand, the other arm or hand is performing differently. So this is where we're called to provide answers and solutions. But first of all, we must understand this presentation is divided into three sections. A first general section on why these are topical themes, and considering that the audience here is made of young people, we need to understand how the paradigms are changing. So it's important to have a vision. an understanding. And then we have the projects in the second part, and then lastly, a new initiative on which I'm working with passion. If we look at this map, you see this is a geographical map, a traditional geography political map, if you like. Now, it's the sizes of the countries that give us values here. If we want to change a parameter, and if we change the value underlying, for instance, oil consumption, if we want to draw this oil consumption map, you see that the map changes its shapes and sizes. And you see Italy, for instance, how fat it is, because Italy does not have raw materials, natural resources, so we consume 85% of our energy with fossil fuels, namely oil. Recently, gas has increased its share. So if we look at this map, we see that in terms of sustainability, we should focus towards south, because you see that the larger countries, we're talking about geographically larger countries such as Latin America and Africa, for instance, they don't produce energy. So if I look at the map, I can draw a line here and say we should be grateful that this half of the world is not expanded such as this other part of the world, otherwise things would be even worse. So the need is that if we want to remain in those dimensions, it means that somebody else has to be downsized, has to be maintained in the conditions they are. And I could look at it in another way, if you like. CO2 emissions and energy footprint. In other words, how much I need to consume energy and resources to express my living conditions. So these two parameters can be represented here in this map. And you see how, for instance, we, to maintain our living style and standard of living, we need a footprint, an ecological footprint, which is large. In the case of Italy, we need a territory which is 9 times greater than our territory. So where am I going to expand? This means that I'm consuming a higher amount of resources, more than those that I could afford. This means that in the future we will have an increasing amount of green diplomacy, because negotiating becomes important. One of the important actions in China today, I work in Africa. In Africa, they don't speak African languages, they speak Chinese, because China is investing and buying land in China because of what I said. They are optioning areas, territory, land for the resources they will require and need in the future. So this gives us a geopolitical understanding of what's happening and the balances which are occurring. And you might say, what has architecture got to do with all this? Well, architecture has much to do with this because, as I said earlier, 50% of all energy produced is used in buildings. So architects are important players in the change that will happen in the coming years. When I say architects, I'm using a word that includes designing, engineering, and new work and activities, such as consultants that work and deal with energy, bioclimate, and so on and so forth. There are many, many professions involved. Today, it's difficult to define what an architect does in the classical definition. Our work is changing. Suffice it to mention how much work is done on communicating our work. This is another profession. Communication on our profession. It's another aspect of our work. There's an increasing interaction with engineers. I have always had an excellent relationship with engineers. The conflict, the pseudo conflict between architects and engineers has never existed for me, because this is the right binomium, architect and engineer, and each should do well their own job. But a typical Italian anomaly is that in Italy you want to be what everyone else is. You know, you want to work with the skills of others, and this can damage quality work. I work with many people, many engineers, and the best are those who are exclusively engineers, those who help me to find the solutions that we need. So we are going towards a time where our job is more hybrid. The boundaries between engineering and architecture is not very clear-cut. Engineering has to be elicited to find innovative solutions, and the architects require technical, scientific information to become more creative. So you see, the two spheres overlap, and that's the interesting part of the fact that qualifications are becoming more and more hybrid. So going back to what we were saying earlier, if today we were to continue the way we're operating, we will need more and more, and that extra will not be available, so we need to find and strike the right balance. So the ecological footprint, you'll find all the definitions you want for this expression, but it is very important, and it gives us the scale of what has become topical today in architectural discussions. Lifestyles, for instance, and performance. When we speak of reclassifying the energy collocation of buildings, we assume that buildings have a standard consumption pattern. And then if you remove the usage from this concept, but if you can make the perfect building, but if it's used badly, what you designed is useless. So the usage becomes very, very important when it comes to the performance of a building. So combining CO2 emissions, therefore building structures that consume and produce less CO2, and working on the footprint, which has become so important today, these are the elements on which we have to increasingly focus. Now, the impact of all this is important. When we talk about 2020 and 2050, we are focused on the short term, and we miss sight of the longer term. The environmental issues are not resolved with the political mandates of a government. We will see the results in 30, 40, 50 years from now. So you will be the players in 20 years' time of what we're talking about today. We are following a process that started years ago, but the players will be the youths of today. Tomorrow you will have more restrictions when it comes to the environment and the energy than we have today. So we have to understand why we're going in a certain direction. 2020 emerged as topical with the magical formula 2020-20. London and the European Commission said the following meeting appointment will be 2050, because it was understood that the change in using fossil fuels will not be speedy, and substituting these energies with renewable energies will require time. Industries will have to be accompanied, and there will be a need for regulations. We don't have regulations today that can develop these things. For years, I didn't like bureaucracy and red tape and regulations, but then I realized that the major changes occur because someone decides there's a rule, a regulation, and that's when the major changes occur. Today, this process is not as streamlined. One example for all. It is mandatory to declare the energetic or the energy class of a building. It's not mandatory. It's not compulsory. Platinum LEED is an award that was won by this building. I mean, there are very, very few buildings that have won this award. Most buildings are in class G. I mean, that is the standard, that is the norm. Today, we can build buildings that consume much less energy, exponentially less energy. If every building put on its door what category of energy consumption it belonged to, then things would be different. So if I see it, I will go and look for another building that consumes less energy, because today this is important. It's part of the investment calculation. So business as usual, as it is written here, is not an option anymore. We no longer have the option of business as usual. In other words, we can't do the same things we've been doing in the past. So the rationale now is that of a zero carbon economy. This means reducing consumptions and CO2 emissions above all is the only path we can take. So we might as well accept this as a fact and start working seriously on these elements. So why is it so important? I'm showing you this chart to show you that since 1973, the first oil crisis, to date, there's been an intense agenda, internationally speaking, from the large crisis, the great crisis in 1973, the oil embargo. We realized that oil was no longer available and easily. The embargo demonstrated this. Italy, with all its paradoxes and contradictions, after this crisis, created an innovative law. In 1978, Italy passed the number 10 law on energy saving and the thermal specifications for buildings. We were the first in Europe to do this. We passed the law and we didn't implement it. That's the difference. Whilst the others implemented a law that came later for them. So we passed the law, but nothing was done to enforce it. It was hugely innovative, but it didn't work. But thereafter, in '92, we have the Rio summit. That was important. In June, we have the Rio Plus 20. And they're going to gather in Rio de Janeiro again to discuss environmental issues. Then we had the Kyoto Protocol. Then we had the LEED specifications, certifications. Then we had the Johannesburg summit and so on and so forth. So we see that in a shorter and shorter period of time, many, many events have happened. The United Nations have organized meetings. Um, CO2 reduction measures have been set. If we want to reduce by 40% carbon emissions, we can't just make a law. We have to think about the process that will lead to that target. And the process is very important because I believe that over time, managing these processes is important. And this is a path of no return. I mean, there's no going back. We can't build buildings that don't take all this into account. So this is the course we must undertake. Architecture, of course, has huge responsibilities in this. Earlier I said accountability in architecture. Besides all the responsibilities of an architect, the technical aspects, of course, but the impact of a building in everyone's life is just as important, if not more so. This building, Italcementi, what this building does and doesn't do is for the benefit of others. And this is important. It's important to understand this when you think of a building and its perimeter and its impact. So what is slowly being understood is what is related to the costs related to climate change, for instance, and how we manage the climate and the costs this has as an impact. For instance, environmental disasters have a huge impact. Even the major natural disasters such as floods and so on, these have a huge impact in terms of costs. So to manage the climate-related costs becomes very important because it means approaching economics in a different way. This map is interesting because it makes a forecast for the following 20 years. What is important is the important resources are energy and water, of course, but there are other other resources that are important and that are important. For instance, noise and pollution, noise and air pollution. Energy and water, of course, will become more and more important, but other elements are changing. For instance, noise and air pollution will no longer become important because you see they will dwindle in terms of their importance because public and private transport is going towards the use of electrical engines and motors. So in 25 years from now, we won't have the same type of pollution that we have today. Things are changing politically, whilst the climate will remain an important theme. Biodiversity, for instance, will become more important. It's small today, it'll become more and more important in the future. The ability to maintain biodiversity. So when we look at this map, or this chart, and we consider these two elements, processes, for instance, related to waste. In some countries are high-tech and advanced. We no longer have landfills. We have recycling, which is at the center. So things change, but these two remain high, energy and water, and these have much to do with architecture. So in speaking of sustainability, we have to be cautious. We must also understand that the efficiency of a building is not provided simply by architecture alone, but by a process which stems from the question of reducing energy demand. And then if you don't make a construction that uses heat mass and uses natural lighting and so on, all those elements that are part of architecture, if this process is not considered from the beginning, then of course, what's the use of using fuel cells, sorry, using photovoltaic cells for uh, energy? I mean, it, you have to begin by reducing the demand for energy, work on the efficiency, and then thereafter use the renewables such as solar energy, for instance. So this means that on the agenda of a project, among the very first things to be done, I must think environmentally to start with, and then from there develop a different type of building. So all transparent buildings would become a problem, for instance, because we can't manage the mass of a building through glass only. So this means I must use other solutions to just using windows and glass. And so there are many things and themes that come together in this process. The use of natural lighting, for instance, is something that I've been involved with for a long time. There's the dimension of how you're going to use lighting has an impact, and when it comes to area, factors of scale intervene. So when it's a question of lighting, you can do this and test it for yourself. You can measure the day factor. You'll find it in the European Handbook. On the last page, you can make a photocopy of that page, and you can make like a telescope, and you can, for instance, put it in your scale and understand how many looks there are in your model. And you don't need a laboratory to do these tests. So what I'm trying to say here is this. You don't need sophisticated devices to make these measurements and understand these things. I attended a competition in France, for instance, for a solar energy research institute, and in the call for tender, they required that the amount of natural light inside the buildings had to have an average of 400 lux. That was huge, because in the average I have to include days such as this, a cloudy day when there's less light. But if that becomes a specification, I can't make a banana just because it's beautiful. I have to work hard and find the solution for that kind of lighting distribution. And I find new forms. I must find new ways to do this through architecture and through creativity. There are calls for tender in architectural competitions today that are where the requests made are really very, very different in types. Now, an architect can be dangerous. Very dangerous. An architect can cause huge damage or create something wonderful. There is this dualism, very dangerous. So one must be aware of one's responsibilities. Architecture is immobile in the sense that once you've built something, it's going to stay there for a long time. So you have to be cautious. The use of a building is not just the indoor, the interior, but it's seen and visible from the outside. So you have to be very, very much accountable. These past few weeks, we conducted the following exercise. We have designed many buildings and projects over these past years. These are all the buildings we designed and built. These are the ones we built. These are the ones we designed, and these are the ones we built. And you see the ratio between designed and built. In gray, you see the CO2 emissions for air conditioning and heating inside a building using the regulation parameters. In green is what we did along with our clients by improving and often anticipating the regulations. You see the maps. The maps are so different in our work. You can follow one principle or another. What is interesting in this aspect, and which is related to the notion of responsibility, is that regulations are not always the best tools to do these things. Because if the legislation system doesn't progress, what can we do? The major developers have been doing their role, and they have defined sustainability and provided the specs for this. So regardless of whether it's in Malaysia, Milan, or China, the standard used is not required by the regulations or the governments, but it's required by the market. So this means that it won't be the regulations that will establish our parameters, but it will be the market laws to do so. These are this is a grassroots process, if you like. It's a bottom-up approach. Um, it's related to the economy. So certifications, innovative instruments will be more and more used. In Italy, for instance, we are related to groups that ask us, okay, we must comply with the rules, but we want to go beyond the rules, beyond the regulations. And this entails, in an architectural study, an office, the emerging of a new profile, the certifiers. These are architects that work with an architectural office, and they provide the certifications. So the notion of sustainability is opening up for new jobs, new professional profiles. What is interesting, besides these figures, these are per square meter. This is the standard reduction that we have when it comes to CO2 emissions between the design and the building. We improve the situation considerably, as you can see. Now, this is just mere theory, but follow me. If this is the total emissions, and this is the first level of reduction of these emissions, this cut by 17% is provided thanks to technology. Over time, machines perform better, products are more efficient, and that's one piece of the cake. But then comes the architecture. You see, and this is not technology. So this game won't be played on just technology alone. I mean, technology is not enough to make up for mistakes made in a building from the architectural point of view. So what am I saying? I'm saying architects are very important. Of course, I'm defending my role because often architects are not always considered socially useful. I have said that in Italy, architects are socially useless because nobody calls them as consultants, as experts. Over the past 10 years, there has not been one Italian prime minister that has used the word architecture. There are other topics. Nobody in Italy has seen architecture as an opportunity. We might not all agree on this, but this is my point of view. So it's important. Architects, through their design, can change things. Because this is a skill, I ask you to invest on your resources, your skills, because this is the only thing you can do to really survive on this market, not just the market for architects, but the market at large. So the way in which we design a building becomes key for the result we are aiming at. And if you Google the amount of CO2 that you saved in terms of tonnage, you get exactly this kind of information. How many times you can travel around the moon and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, what was the saving? Now, I would like my idea to become reality in the future, regardless how long it's going to take. One day, um, those who sell oil will say, I'm producing oil, but nobody wants to buy it anymore. Nobody wants to buy it because they found a cheaper way, a more ecological and a more environmentally friendly way to consume energy. So they will have to put oil on sale at much lower prices. And that will lead to savings on our energy bills.
Un altro capitolo, alcune direttive europee.
Some European directives that have been very important these past few years tell us that the main themes will be two. One is culture diversity, diversity of cultures. We live in a more and more integrated world. How are we going to manage cultural diversities? In Italy, the way this is approached is by saying, we have other ethnic groups arriving in Italy. The world is already multi-ethnic. All you have to do is just visit the US, not in China because they're all Chinese in China, but go to Africa, there's a bit of everything. You go to India, the world is already multi-ethnic. I come from a town such as Genoa, which was a multicultural melting pot hundreds of years ago. So defending diversity is an important theme, and it relates much to what we were saying earlier about biodiversity. Humans are different, just as plants are different, and we protect biodiversity, and yet we don't defend in the same way the fact that as humans we're all diverse as well. I'm referring to the racial and ethnic aspects. And then, of course, the ecological aspects. Conflicts will increase on this. For instance, when I hear that today we can't use a car because we have the pollution that has gone beyond a certain threshold, I, as a driver, say, I'm charged taxes on my ownership of my motor car. Why shouldn't I use it today? Besides the fact that public transport has to be rationalized and so on. All these are the themes that are going to raise social conflicts, and we must provide creative and technological answers and solutions to all this. Since '92, I carry with me an image. I have yet to replace this. What you're about to see is a smart gentleman with intelligent solutions. This is the image. Now, I show you this image and you say this person is a Bedouin with a camel. It seems obvious, but if I show you how this person is moving, the picture changes. Of course. But this man is a doctor that has a GPS telephone in his pocket. The camel has an antenna on its nose to capture signals. Then we have a photovoltaic cell that feeds a battery that feeds the fridge, the refrigerator. This is an image of technology. If technology is useful, it becomes important. If technology is not useful, then it's useless. So if we can mitigate the use of technology and build our buildings as much as possible without equipment, optimizing as much, and then we use some technology, it is likely that the theme of renewables and consumption of energy becomes more realistic. Of course, we have to change rules. I know that there are many engineers here that work and develop machinery and equipment and have to comply with rigorous specifications with regard to energy consumption and so on. But you can't say that buildings have to be at 22 degrees Celsius, because I can't keep a building at 22 degrees Celsius with these technologies constantly. But do we really need that temperature in all our buildings? What surprises me is there is no place in which humans live where these conditions exist. We leave the building and it can be cold, warm outside, and we're not worried. We go home. Some people have air conditioning, some don't. People can open and close a window. In an office, it has to be 22 degrees Celsius. In other words, in any other habitat, we can vary the temperatures, but in an office, no. I think this is an illusion, like at the end of the century, because there was a moment when we decided we have a long history. We want to substitute ourselves to nature. Man said the machine will replace natural processes. So I want a building where I don't care what's outside because I have my ideal world inside the building. Now, this dream is too costly today, because to be able to do so, we have to fill these buildings with equipment. And then, all in all, do we need this kind and level of perfection? No, we don't. So this is why we need to change some paradigms, parameters. We need to accept a range of temperatures. For instance, so if it's warm, you can take your jacket off. If it's too cold, you can put it on. It may sound trivial, but it's okay to do this. The equipment engineers know this very well. Those ranges that are provided in the specs can have a huge impact on the energy and energy consumption. Let me now show you a project that we shared with Italcementi. I'm not showing this here because I'm at their home, but I show it always. This is on the theme of the home. This is a fascinating topic. Residential buildings has never really been my passion. It is not a process which stems as a reply to a question. It's a question of quantities. In other words, we have to build so much residential, and what is that square meter is a question that not everyone wants to ask. So I know that an architect has to answer a question that has to be set by somebody. So they call me and they say, I want to do this building. If nobody comes to call upon me to build a building, what am I going to do? I can't provide the input. So I said, nobody is asking me to design a project for a social housing. So I contacted a survey organization, and they conducted a survey on Italian households. In Italy, we speak of rooms when we speak of homes. 2 rooms, 3 rooms, 4 rooms, plus kitchen, corridor, and bathroom. Nobody would use this terminology if we talked among ourselves. Rather, we would prefer to talk about how we enjoy using and living in our homes. The home is the only intimate space that we're left with today, because in the chaos of communication today, the home, the cozy home, is the only thing where we can have privacy and intimacy. So if the home is a desire, we need to understand the desire. So they conducted a survey on a few thousand households. It's called Housing Evolution, and they surveyed what Italians have in their homes. Of course, one of the aims was marketing, and we see what the Italians have in their homes, and these things define the types of the different families and households. So the map which emerged from this is a map of Italian households, Italian families. We have the house as a forum. My home, I have many friends, for instance. I want a place where we can meet and talk. For me, the living room, for instance, is the most important part of the house, the home. Or the home for the elderly, the bunker home as it was defined, because they're afraid. And so the ideal place to find comfort is the kitchen. They're not interested in the living room, where I can feel safe. For others, it is the student home, the tent-like home, because people are more mobile, they move around, and you don't need huge spaces. They can live in just one room. So if we look at these maps of how people live, of course, the theme of the number of rooms is obsolete. Why should I build homes based on this notion of rooms if somebody then is going to demolish it and build it and refurbish it anew with new spaces? Whilst the topic of consumption is important, Italian households are households that have an idea of savings, which is considered very important. We rank first among savings, household savings in Europe, and we're good because we monitor our bills. There's much focus on saving and ecology, environment, for instance, on paints, much attention. Children, so in homes today, for instance, if the paint you use doesn't have the right specs, because children lick the walls, they get intoxicated, so there's much awareness in Italy with regard to the toxicity of paints, for instance. So you see, you can have all these different maps depending on the different demands and desires of households. So with Italcementi, we thought about a prefabricated product. It's a horrible word because you think of a warehouse, but even a car is prefabricated. So prefabrication is a huge concept. The theme of costs. Over time, oil prices will grow, so the management of a home will grow in terms of costs. So if we extrapolate for 20 years, when we build a home, to use renewable energy resources, of course, it'll cost more to build, but once we've invested on renewables, after a certain amount of time, we will buffer the costs and begin to save. So the home has to be accessible. A house that costs 100,000 euros for 100 square meters is a simple structure. I'm not going to sell you a home. I'm going to sell you a living space. Today there's a huge potential thanks to IKEA, Leroy Merlin, etc. Italy, the furniture industry in Italy has been attacked, if you like, marketing-wise and market-wise from IKEA, for instance, where what you're sold is a package that you can then assemble on your own. I find it very interesting that you do this and choose your own furniture and build your own furniture. In other words, these new options, these different options provide for new things that become possible. So you can buy the space of your home and then go to IKEA and furnish it with what you like and do it yourself, in other words. What's more, we have the different cultures where people build their own home. They go to Castorama, assemble the panels, and build their home. Now, all this is outside the building industry. So our idea is, let's make a simple frame with these concrete slabs and panels. And so we provide the heat isolation so that the building, with nothing else, enters energy class A, 100 square meters of photovoltaic cell panels, and then we use the building as such for thermal efficiency. And this is 960 euros per square meter in costs. And then you can do whatever you like within the building, inside the building. This was our slogan. So I would imagine advertising this home in this way. I'm going to sell you a low-cost home, your dream home at low cost. So the prototype that we developed and that we are working on, multi-story in this case, comes from the idea that the home is like a village. So if it's a condominium, you can enter from different accesses. Terraces are important because it helps to develop the idea of sharing, and the young enjoy this more. This enjoying common areas, the condominium shared common areas. So we have the little cabbage patch for the retired person that wants to grow his own vegetables, and then other spaces for the younger generation and so on. Now, of course, I don't want to develop the world in this way, but I would like to develop one of these and see if this is an appropriate solution. We have been unable to do this so far, to pursue this project, because it seems that nobody agrees that it is possible. People believe there's no demand for this. And then we have the cement and concrete prefabricated pieces and elements. It's no longer what it used to be. It's now precast material, in other words, today is readily available, and it can help us save. And so here you are, your 100 square meters of space, and then you can go to IKEA, buy your own, assemble your own, and save money. This was the theme, and the matching was this: the 3 floors, because we associated the 100 square meters to the distribution of the 3 apartments, and then with the geothermal system. This comes from the literature. What was fascinating for me was that the press, the media, accepted this notion, this idea, and they wrote articles on this, because in the end, instead of buying a car, which is not sustainable today, I can buy this photovoltaic system and save every month and collect energy credits. And so technology means I can pay part of my investment, and if that's the case, This means the right way to do technological innovation. We opened a new website, simple, so that you can read all the explanations concerning this project. This is what you mentioned earlier. This is a bizarre project. We defend the idea that I'm an architect. I don't think that we have to stop building new things. We have to continue to go on building in a different way, less intensively, but build quality. It's true that the construction industry in the years to come will entail refurbishing portions of the city. We have to refurbish and restore. 2/3 of people live in cities, city centers, so working on the buildings which already exist has an important value because we can improve the quality, the aesthetic qualities of our cities, and we can also do much more. So this is a Milan project in Via Santander near Romolo. Starts and stems from this idea. These are buildings. These are buildings which exist, and they are refurbished with thermal isolation, and student homes are built on top. These are council homes, like these are social housing. This is social housing, and the addition is for school, student housing. So this is a way to refurbish ugly buildings, for instance. So we can redo the facades and then build something on top, a prefabricated wooden structure with new techniques, and it can be assembled as if it were made of cards. It's a small investment, and those 2 extra floors, one is for the lodging, small lodgings for students, and above the terrace and the kitchen. They will be ready next year. We've received the approvals. Of course, the red tape is cumbersome, but we're drawing towards the conclusion of this stage. And by the end of next year, we shall have these small homes on top of these pre-existing buildings. When we presented the project to the neighborhood, there's hundreds of families living in these apartments, they were concerned. These are social housing, as I said. I mean, the social conditions of some of these families are difficult conditions sometimes. This is the study areas. People were concerned, but then they realized at last that there were going to be students living in this area, in this neighborhood. They were going to use the lifts, the escalators, the lifts and the stairs. So they realized that there was going to be a new community living in the neighborhood, and they saw that as very positive. This is another idea, a simple idea of providing new finishings for the facades of pre-existing buildings and so on. This is something being built now. The yard was started on the 15th of April, very recently. The red tape, again, it's very long. I mean, it's difficult in Italy to do these things, not because it's difficult in itself, but it's because the red tape is cumbersome, as I said, and so sometimes the risk is that something becomes obsolete by the time you get all the authorization to build. We've had some disputes with regard to this project because there was a call for tender, and the person ranking second, of course, made a claim with those who had decided and went to the judge. And so the mechanism, the legal mechanism that ensued gets lengthy, because this doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. 80% of European disputes are in Italy, so 20% of the rest of Europe, and 80% of legal disputes are in Italy with regard to legal disputes concerning um, construction practices. Anyway, at the end, we managed to get the authorization to start with this project. This project, I am speaking for too long, maybe. Tell me if I'm running too late. Anyway, the theme here is shape and performance. So is there a relationship between the shape of a building and its performance? This project is an attempt to explain this relation between shape and performance. This is a one-story building, and then we have these chimneys that are much higher, as you can see, and they bring in the light, but they also provide ventilation. We worked with a company from Padua called TIFF on this project. They are experts in environmental engineering. These chimneys have this function. This project is in Ferrara. It's warm and humid in summer and cold and humid in winter. And one solution is that by increasing air ventilation, ventilation helps the evaporation process that reduces the humidity percentage. This building is in wood, it's just timber, and the chimneys capture the light. Some use photovoltaic energy, and then there's a filter that brings the light, and then there's an increase in the ventilation through the same structure. And this opens a new situation. I mean, architects use tools, and the tools you can use are wide-ranging. In the old days, we used to work with ink and paper, and today we have new tools. This is in Turin. This is a natural light laboratory that the Turin Polytechnic uses. This is 1/6 of the sky light, and what you do is you put a model underneath the artificial sky. There is a rotation, a summation of all the data, and this instrument tells you on what amount of light you have in the building based on what kind of weather you have outside, if it's a gray day or a bright day. Now, so these calculations, in 1-2 days you can make all these assessments, and then you can choose the materials that you're going to use, and you can therefore study the performance, the efficiency, the light and thermal efficiency parameters for the whole year. So you can work out day by day, month by month, depending on the climate and so on, that changes and so on. And so if you do this within a lab, for instance, you know exactly where the sun hits on a certain day in June, and therefore you can design the curtains and you can design the windows based on these results. Now, this is just an example to show you how we can improve architecture and the quality of architecture. Architecture is part of all these themes and topics. And then, of course, IT, information technology. This is radiance, for instance, and it tells you through those chimneys and through the windows what light, what amount of light, what the radiance is, and it gives you the possibility to conduct the analyses. This is an engineering work, if you like. We do this in our firm in our office. We have people devoted to this type, and this means that we can then have a full-fledged dialogue with the engineers. So when the request or the spec is 400 looks, I can use these instruments to give me in a short time an answer on what I need to do, what materials to use, and what the sizes and the dimensions have to be to meet those requirements. And you see these chimneys in winter work like this, because they have windows, it creates a greenhouse effect on the upper section, and then through the ventilation I can have the air circulate, and so I can mix the air and generate the temperature I want. Now, this building doesn't work in doing this alone, but it solves part of the problems. And then we have heating on the floor, which helps to compensate. And during that was for the winter. In summer, the system is reversed. So basically, the hot air rises because it's warmer in summer, and it goes out, and then the ventilation is drawn or draws in the cooler air from the outside in the garden, the cooler air in the garden, and has it circulate within the building. These are like cartoons. You think this is like a cartoon, but behind these graphics, there's a huge amount of engineering work. This shows the impact on CO2 consumption, production, and this is the building. These are not all projects that have been completed because there's many competitions that we've attended. Of course, it's great to attend competitions, but it's more gratifying to win them. You attend many competitions, but you don't win all of them. So, for instance, this was a competition. We didn't win this, but this was one of the projects that we presented at one competition. This is a small building that we presented in Ireland, a small center for a utilities company, and this idea came from these hexagon granite structures that are typical of Ireland and Scotland. So we came from this idea, and this is in line with the idea that architecture is always close to the landscape, close to the tradition, close to the local, to the locus. And for instance, this was the roof that would filter the light, and this theme was integrated with the photovoltaic and the wind energy. And then from above it looked like a meadow with holes. This is another project not far from here. It's the building of 3M. The building is not far from Linate Airport, and this project stemmed from the idea that the building was on a road with heavy traffic, and so the building was established, the design was with these horizontal structures that would give it an horizontal look rather than the typical vertical look of any building. Usually the modules are standard. This is why we have normal buildings that all look alike. So we worked with the horizontal idea, a building that therefore is not finite, it's scaled, so to say, and it slips away. And this came from a simple idea. Because the exposure is east-west, morning eastwards, so that means when the sun rises, and then westwards in sunset, we needed to save energy during the summer months, during the winter months, and therefore reduce the amount of light during the summer. So what we did was this: these horizontal elements enable us to create shade over the windows in summer to reduce the heat, and also I can work with glass. With double glazings, it's not always easy to do this. It's very difficult to work with this. So we improved the performance, and the result is aesthetically what you see here. And it's like a piece of crusty bread. And there are inner gardens that help the ventilation for the air circulation. And then we have the terraces, as you can see, with 1,500 meters of photovoltaic cells. So we make it a building that meets the regulatory standards, the energy standards for Class A for the Lombard region. And these are some details of the building. This is a building in Via Famagosta, which is about to be finished between Famagosta and Romola, the two underground stations. And this is a building, an office building, which rests on like feet. It's as if it were a bridge above ground, so that the ground floor is this. This was important because in this area there are many, many buildings and there's no ground floors. What we like in cities is that you can walk around the perimeter of a building. We wanted, therefore, a tower that had a big imprint, but because is where the students that attend the Ulm University arrive from the underground, we thought that it would be nice to have the ground floor totally open, so the building rests on these pillar-like structures, and you can walk on the ground floor, walk around, and there's a big square with a garden and a car park underneath, and we have windows, double glazing windows on the southwest flank, and then indoors, we have a wall panel. This is a competition that we attended in France, a cultural center, this was a small project for a small municipality. I love France because there are really a huge amount of competitions, and so it's easy to attend and attend the tenders that are called, and they select you, and if they select you, they pay you, and it reimburses you for your costs. And this was a 10,000 inhabitant village, and they built a cultural center for dance and music. And it's a small building, a rotating small building with a huge ramp that led to the terrace overlooking the landscape, and inside the multicultural area with l'École des Arts, dance, music, and an academy. And this was interesting, a play of different elements, everything happening at the square, and then a simple ramp for the citizens, the inhabitants to use, and then entering this huge space with all these different activities. And that's the square and the building as seen from an air view. We now are beginning to work on a building in Africa, in Ghana, and we are building this office building close to the airport. I had never been to Africa. It's a it's a continent that I didn't know well, and I went to Ghana, the Ivory Coast, amazing countries. The GDP of Ghana is growing at 13% a year. Amazing. Nigeria has the largest oil reserves in the world, and in 20 years' time it will have 250 million inhabitants. That's Nigeria alone. So countries such as these will have huge requirements and needs, and therefore this just to say that there are countries such as Ghana with a solid democracy, so there are good prospects for investments. A very interesting country, and the people are so hospitable. The theme here was dimensions, size. I was fascinated by the drawings. The triangle is a common theme here. Ghana is at a different latitude from Europe, of course, because it's tropical. The sun is not a curve. The movement of the sunlight, it's much more vertical and brisk. So, in a country in which there are no thermal points, there are no thermal bridges, there are no double glazings, there are none of those requirements that we have in Europe, where there are temperature excursions throughout the year. So here, the idea was we needed to shield the building from light, and so when you use windows, you have to create the shade to protect the building. So we have the windows here, as you can see, that are shaded by the over sprawling floors. The shapes are simple. We have an unorderly geometry, if you like. Building perfectly in countries such as this is impossible. It's not as simple to build a building. You need qualified and skilled labor. You can't just mix cement and do it. So imperfection, which is one of the themes of beauty, is one of the themes in these places. So a building that was not regular aligned, this gives us a possibility, the possibility of hiding the imperfections. So for instance, if this is a little more crooked and this overlays a little more, it's not a problem. So we have all these blades that are not aligned. These floors are moving almost. There's an imprecision that is embedded in the design itself. And then this cement structure, the structure, and no building is, and not one of these structures is identical to the other. There are 16 pivots that are the same, and the others are different. And so the sizes and symmetries change. The building yard is on its way. It's an Italian developer. There are Italian companies involved here. and a British client required an energy certification. This is very rare in Africa, and we used a certification system called Green Stars. This shows you that there is a period of the year in which there is a temperature in this area, for instance, where we can have natural ventilation. So this helps us design a building where natural ventilation in the lower section of the windows, which open up, thanks to the garden outside, we can generate the ventilation to manage the temperature in the building. These are the systems of extensions that protect the windows with shade, and you see all the facades are more or less the same, and you saw the ventilation flow in the other slide, and these are other pictures to illustrate the project. And then we conducted some experiments in China. I built 2 buildings in China, one in Beijing with the Environment Ministry, a building close to in the Tsinghua University, the Environmental Department, and then another building for Nottingham in the UK. When we started working in China, they ask you for rendering and they do the rest. So I'm not always interested in these projects because it's not appropriate not to follow the full project. So we were called by an entrepreneur that does prints and fabrics. They called us for the design, and we provided the design for this building. We didn't do the building. And so we worked on the idea of fabric, weaving of a fabric. So the warp and the weft of a fabric. And you see, this is the result. The warp and the weft of a fabric with different colored tubes, as if they were yarns of a fabric. And this was helpful to examine the light, the lighting, and so it changed on the different facades with the different sunlight exposure. This is another project that we won for the University of Aosta in northwestern Italy. This is the center of Aosta. This is the Roman wall, and this is the Costa Folchi military barracks. It's the Alpini barracks. It has now been disposed of, and we have this as a main theme in Italy. There are railway sites that are being disposed of, as well as military sites that are being disposed of. And so it's a question of restoring and refurbishing these sites. A superintendent of the Beaux-Arts rarely says knock down buildings and do whatever you like. This was one of these cases. We were able to demolish some of the structures, and so we built these 2 buildings, which will become offices and the library. And then this lot will involve a square. This is the town hall, and this is a very important section of the town. Now, the project and the design started from some simple concepts. Aosta is a town at the end of the valley, so it's very warm in summer, just like Bolzano. 37 degrees Celsius in summer is the temperature in Aosta, just as warm as a city or a town in Sicily. Whilst in winter, the mountains are close by, it can be very, very cold. So these are the images that inspired the building at the university. We were compelled only to comply with the imprint. We were unable. We had to use these two imprints. This is the library. These two wings are like two pieces of ice shaped by the wind and the ice. And there we have the student housing. And the idea is to work on these ideas. In the 1800s, there was a theme of working with the local concepts. In this case, we did the same. We worked with a local concept and then created some empathy, for instance, with the sections that enable to go from one area to the other. This is the piazza, the square. The design was started with this approach, and because the energy class that we had to comply with was class A, we went from this to this other shape, and the shape being more compact, this meant we improved the performances. So between this shape and the cube, there is a 2% difference in terms of the performance. So we changed the model, changed the shape, because we needed to meet these goals and targets. And when it comes to dispersion, in other words, the efficiency, we had to rearrange the shape again, once again, to meet the targets. So by integrating and improving the performance and working with renewable resources, we have a building which complies 100% with CO2 emissions. And these are other pictures or models to show you the project again. So I conclude now with a story. Can I talk for 10 more minutes, if you're patient enough? Over these years, I have been devoted to all these themes. Not all my clients agree with me, and in 2011, now 2011 was an important year because I went to Ramallah for a conference. Ramallah is the capital of the West Bank. To speak there on the green future of Palestine. Of course, they have many, many problems besides this. And when I went there to talk, I discovered that that was a topic that was important for them. Of course, a solution to that region has to be found. And of course, the environment, the energy are all important topics for policies. So speaking of a green future, there was not easy, considering the conditions there. I met the United Nations Refugees Agency of the UN there. I met the persons that work for this agency. They work there to help the Palestinians, the Palestinian population there. And so in talking about schools, we talked about building a school in a place where there are few resources. But just like Palestine, there are many other countries where there is no access to energy, uh, water, and the water that is available is polluted. And one of the and of course this is caused by uh, bad environment quality. The artesian wells are contaminated, so the water tables, the underground water table is polluted, and this leads to catastrophic conditions. So we designed a project for a green school in Gaza that we're going to begin to build shortly. And this came from a simple idea. If there is nothing in a place, how can we do something that has a meaning? They have 700 schools, 100 are being built anew. There are many, many young people that need to attend school. So building a school through the know-how of knowing how to build, and therefore transferring knowledge more than technology. Knowledge is something that you can do. So building in a better way can give advantages. For instance, they don't collect rainwater in the northern area of the Western Bank. The territory is mountainous, high rainfall, but Ramallah and Gaza, just like Sicily, has 400 milliliters of water per square meter. It's not a small amount, but not a huge amount either. So we needed to build a building that would therefore collect water, store it, and then through a system of gardens, the water could be filtered and purified, and a school such as that would pay for water $1,000 a month. So we might build a building in which in the summer the temperature is 10, 8 or 7, 8 degrees lower than outside temperature. We have a 2,000-year history in which machinery didn't exist. So there are many examples of buildings that were naturally air-conditioned. We worked with several organizations and companies, Fabio Milan, Molan, Mario Laio, that does phytodepuration. We brought together a group, a team of people that believes in these things, and this is the project we came up with. So a year later, the result is an association that will have the target of, will have the mission of developing these projects, building green futures, along with humanitarian aid. So we would like to build in this way, and we believe that you need this. One of the initiatives that we have embarked on in the Middle East, in Palestine, and another one is in Ghana. And through these initiatives, with local architects that work there, we're working at these initiatives. In Palestine, we have Rashid, a Palestinian Jordan person that will follow the project. Joado in Ghana, Brother Pitt launched a competition. He won the competition for a project in New Orleans. So we're bringing together this team of people with skills and know-how. And alongside all this, of course, training. Training is important. We need to train. School does what it can. University has a privileged role in this, but this is one of the reasons why I'm here. Italcementi and I share this. Today, technological research and know-how is in the hands of companies. Product and process research is conducted by companies. Now, of course, the professionals have to have access to this area. So it becomes absolutely important to train at the professional level. Of course, there are universities where this is done, but there is a link between the world that knows how and the professional world that has the technical skills, that needs the technical skills. So I'd like, and this is our ambition, to set up a permanent workshop in which we have the young people that come from throughout the world, and on the other hand, we have the companies that have projects for this. So not you should not just become creative, but also exchange information with organizations, for instance, and then go to Palestine for an internship for 3 months and help build a school. And when you come back, you will be another person. This is one of the things that we want to do. So with companies and universities, we have to develop a new generation of professionals. This is our ambition, to help train on the job many, many young people. So this is a pedagogical project. If it is true that each man brings a teaching and a culture, even buildings bring knowledge and culture. So this is the first building in Gaza which meets these requirements. What about the future? Well, it's difficult to envisage a future in a place where energy issues and all the themes are related to politics. I don't have a political position and don't want to express it. I am a professional and want to find a solution for the problems and the questions that exist there. So in a country, in a place where there is very little, Palestine, the challenge is huge.
Abbiamo sempre un'opportunità e una possibilità.
But there is an opportunity. In a situation such as this, there is an opportunity. There's not that many options here. So what is required here is a huge creative process. Because in a place where there is nothing, you have to be very creative. In my brain, there is 2,000 of years of architectural experience. And many of these were not just architects. So we have a huge heritage. We know how to build. This is something that we have always done and we must continue to do so. So in this context, we have this building, a simple building, and $1.8 million. This is $400 per square meters, 320 euros per square meter, and it's the cost of a school locally because that was the budget. We have these columns. We dug for the foundations. We didn't dig too much. It's a shallow foundation. Then we have these excavated ducts. Then we have a cement floor, and then these cylinders mounted and assembled one on top of the other, filled with the earth from the excavations, so we don't have to move the earth around and transport it, which would raise costs. And these pillars become massive from the heat standpoint, thermal standpoint, and then we fill them in with what is needed. And I have these columns I have the earth, I can plant the vegetation, and the vegetation create the shade, and then the roof collects the water. And this is the project. We have air underground. It goes through the foundation. The temperature drops. The fresh air 17 degrees. Temperature outside is 445 Celsius. So we then have it circulate because of the different gradient, and then we have the air flowing inside the classrooms where the temperature is 8 degrees lower than outside temperature. Of course, the system is non-perfect, but it is a system which has this ambition. And then I realized that working with columns is difficult. There are examples of how difficult it is. The internal courtyard and garden is not there just for aesthetic purposes, but it is used for refiltering grey waters, discharged waters. Now, in Via Savona at the design library, if you like, there is an area which is still to be refurbished. There you can go and visit all the pictures of this project. And you see, we have the plants on the roof here. We have the solar chimneys, and this criterion draws draws the air from the foundations and brings it into the building. This is water distribution per capita. Very little, you see, 50 liters a day. We are at 360 liters per capita per day. This is Palestine. This is the map of rainfall map. 400 milliliters. We can store water in the building, enough for the recirculation. And with the liters available, we can cook, drink, personal hygiene, and some is saved. And so with wastewater, we can redistribute, refilter the wastewater, and recirculate it. And this means that water is available to have a cabbage patch in the school. And all this process is feasible thanks to design, not technology. This is the know-how of our engineers and architects. And then the use of other sources. We will use photovoltaic, and let me conclude. The electrical system. This was important because 400 square meters of photovoltaic cells, which is the minimum for the requirement, the minimum, I said, this makes the school autonomous. But a school that recycles water and produces energy, what happens when it's closed? What happens when the school is closed? So this led to a debate. So the school can become a small hub. When the school is closed, it can distribute energy, electricity to the houses surrounding it, even though it's small energy. So this is the beginning of a small smart grid.
Scuola finita e l'anno prossimo ve la faccio vedere finita. Ecco, questo è il sistema.
And this is the system of the equipment, and you'll find it on the internet if you're interested. and water in the garden, and so on. So please contact us.
Lo condivideremo.
Please contact us if you have any questions, any ideas. We're going to share this with Italcementi. This intends to be a permanent workshop to develop new experiences, internships, training. We're going to start with this school, and we will be presenting this project, in fact, this green project for a green future. Thank you very much.
Grazie Mario, come vi avevo detto all'inizio, introdurre il lavoro di Mario Cucinella.
Thank you, Mario. As I said at the beginning, introducing Mario Cucinella's work was something complex, and this presentation testified this. This is an approach to architecture that goes beyond, and it teaches us above all that sustainable architecture is made of substance. It's substantive, and it doesn't follow the trend, the fad of ecological fur or furs, the fad of ecology in architecture, the facades of vertical meadows and forests. No, this is not what it is. It's more substantive than that. And as we saw, shape is not just for itself, but it has a purpose and it's related for the performance. This will become more and more important in the future. And in all the projects we saw the theme of waste, working with Kilometro Zero in using the resources. And there is also another important theme, interesting theme, in the Ferrara project, in the Kilometro Zero house, and in the Irish project. In these three projects, Mario presented a system which is open, that can be aggregated. It's almost like a never-ending project. Buildings which can be changed formally is another lesson that we draw from this lecture. And another important thing is to think no longer in terms of style. It's not an issue of language, that of Cucinella, but it's an opportunity for diversity, which means listening to the location, which means listening for the appropriate solution. And what characterizes his work is responsibility and complexity as references. Thank you, Mario.
Vi diamo appuntamento sempre poi, scusate, a domani alle 10:30 alla stessa ora con Daniel Libeskind e anche oggi per chi vuole visitare questo edificio, appunto come
As Mario was saying, there are some persons in a white overall outside waiting for you if you wish to visit this building, which, by the way, was awarded the Platinum Lead Award. Thank you.